Good morning, everybody. Boker Tov. It's so beautiful to see everybody on the screen. Want to thank Amy and Brian for mobilizing and enabling this beautiful moment. Micha, of course, we love you. We miss you. We're so grateful to you. Want to thank everybody on the screen for this really important conversation. Micha, I know the announced topic, which is a very important topic, is that you have some new thoughts about how Israel's dismantling of Iran's proxies says a lot about Israeli society, and we are, of course, very eager to hear those thoughts. But it would be unnormal to not begin with how are you? How are you doing? How are you emotionally? How is your family? How is Israel? How are Israelis? And to do that, we also have to talk about how are you in Israel with the hostage releases that are ongoing and all of the intensity and drama around that. And how are you also obviously involves President Trump's Gaza transfer proposal, and your thoughts about that. So, if you could talk about hostages, if you could talk about Gaza, and then if you could talk about your thoughts about the larger question of our dismantling of Iran's proxies. You talk, we listen. At the very end, folks, after about 50 minutes, feel free to put a few questions into the Q&A feature. And if we have time, Amy will call on those questions. Micha, Boker Tov, and thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you. So regarding the hostages, it's very obviously extremely complicated. But I want to pick up on two things that I hope American Jews picked up on. That's one, that this war, these past, how long is this war lasting already? 16 months? Am I right?
Yeah.
So we've seen the worst of humanity, right? We saw the monsters. We saw what us and Israelis we experienced as modern day Nazis. We saw the worst of humanity. I mean, we saw the three of our brothers coming home last Saturday. That's what we all saw, right? That's what we all saw. But at the same time, we're also witnessing human greatness. And we saw human greatness in Israeli society at the very beginning of the war. And we saw this in the bravery of our soldiers. And but suddenly we saw it in the behavior and the attitude of our hostages that came home, which is there's just some things which are unthinkable. It's a gam that tried to keep kosher the whole time she's there, to remind herself she's Jewish, to stay human in those impossible conditions. And Emily Damari that asked to trade places with Keith, to let Keith come home first before her. He needs to come home before her. And Liri Elbag that asked to stay behind with Agam and not to let Agam stay there alone. This is, I mean, it's hard to imagine, I mean, the higher performances of humanity than what we're seeing among these people that are not in special units. They're ordinary, regular Israelis turning out to be extraordinary human beings. And these uh, fighters, these Israelis, they're coming. Gadi comes home after close to 500 days in Gehenom, in the Hamas's tunnels. And the first thing he says, we have to rebuild Nir Oz. Where does that attitude come from? Where does this come from? So witnessing human greatness is not only something very powerful, it's also something very therapeutic. Because even when we're seeing this world going crazy and we're starting to lose faith in humanity, these people come back and remind us that there is humanity in it, and it's very greatest, and it's very best. And another thing to notice about this hostage moment is here, I'm sure it's not only the Israelis, it's the entire Jewish world. We're seeing Agam, and we're seeing Emily, and we're seeing Gadi, and we're seeing them all coming home. And we don't know these people, right? We've never met them. We don't know who they are. They're not family members of ours. And yet we experience them. They're our brothers and our sisters. And that's the collective experience. So we're experiencing a very powerful moment of solidarity. And what patriotism does when it comes at its best it doesn't cultivate hatred for the other. It cultivates love for your own family, for your own community, for your own nation. That's and so we're seeing here patriotism at its best. We're seeing Israelis experiencing, I think you could correct me, maybe it's not only Israelis, the entire Jewish world. We're experiencing a sense of brotherhood and sisterhood. And there's a debate in Israel, and the debate is real. I just want to, and I want to share with you the way I'm trying to frame for Israelis what the debate is about. It's not that people who are for the deal locate the individual above the collective, and the people who are against the deal, the collective above the individual. It's very easy to frame it that way because it's saying, hey, if you're for the deal, by the way, I'm for the deal. I'm for going all the way with the deal, including the horrible prices we have to pay for stage 2. But that's a serious price, and people
The
there's
deal you're talking about now is the hostage release deal, the ceasefire deal.
the ceasefire deal. Yeah. Now
Right,
after
right,
stage 1 and phase 2,
right,
and
right,
which
right.
means more terrorists, letting them out of our of jail. And we know that the first intifada exploded after we let 1,000, I think, over 1,000 terrorists out of jail. They went back into the territory, and they started and things started bubbling up and exploding. The first intifada, and the Shalit deal is what is Yihya Sinwar himself. October 7th, the war of October 7th, we are fighting the fruits of the Shalit deal. So you can understand the Israelis are saying that this could lead to a catastrophe. You can understand us Israelis saying that. The price is humongous. You can understand them. So the way I'm thinking about this, it's not that some people are putting the collective above the individual and others the individual above the collective. It's not nationalism versus liberalism. It's not that. It's patriotism has two forms. It creates a strong sense to protect our national security, and it creates a strong sense of solidarity. National security is based on fear. When you're very nationalistic, you fear your enemies. But you also creates love for your people. You experience them as your brothers and your sisters. What's happening now is the two aspects of patriotism, national security and solidarity, are clashing with each other. And that's, I think, the tragic dilemma that we are in. It's a tragic dilemma because it's not a binary dilemma. It's not a dilemma between good versus bad. It's two very bad options. We have to choose. We have to do something bad here. And to let all these terrorists out and to risk national security is bad. But not to bring home our brothers and sisters, we have the opportunity. That's also bad. And I prefer that bad over that bad. That's all it is. We're trapped in a tragedy, in a tragic dilemma where we have only bad options. The reason why I'm for the deal is because I think that solidarity comes first, and I'll tell you why. Because it's solidarity. It's because of that craziness of us Israelis. They experience every other Israeli like he's a brother and our sister, and it's that solidarity that is pushing our soldiers to a battlefield, and they're willing to sacrifice their lives. And they put up this tremendous fight this past 16 months and smashed Hezbollah proxies and saved Israel after it was under real threat on October 7th. So its solidarity is our national security. If we bury our solidarity now, our collective personality will change. This is a moment, our collective personality is always shaped by what we do. And at this moment, this decision about the deal is not only what we do, it's who we are always going to be. Because after you do a deal, you justify that, and that changes your your collective personality. And if you don't do it, that also. So if we don't do this deal, our solidarity instincts, we won't be able to say that we're the nation of solidarity. We're the nation of Arvut Adadit, the nation of Kol Israel Arevim Ze Leze. If we say no to this deal, we're bearing our solidarity, and when we lose our solidarity, we're losing our national security. So I think when it's solidarity versus national security, solidarity wins, because solidarity is the basis of our national security. So that's why I personally am for this deal. That's the line I'm pushing in Israel. It's not nationalism versus liberalism. It's two forms of nationalism clashing. But this is the tragic dilemma that we're in. And besides being in a tragic dilemma, we're also living in radical uncertainty. And that's the combination that we're living in. So that's an answer to your question, Wes. How are you doing? This is how we're doing. We're in a tragedy and with lack of certainty, and here's where we have to function.
Wow. So Micha, wow, all I can say is thank you. Let that wisdom sink in. I want to ask you one other how are you and how is Israel question before you get to your prepared remarks, which is the president's Gaza proposal. And I would frame it just this way, which is to most of the world, it's anathema. And what's beyond controversy is that it was an idea associated with Mayor Kahana. Transfer was Mayor Kahana's idea, and it was beyond the pale. And then once the president spoke of it, then it's no longer, as Daniel and Yossi had a podcast where they said they banished the ghost of Mayor Kahana, and now it's Donald Trump's idea, not Mayor Kahana's idea, but it's in fact Mayor Kahana's idea. And it's immoral, and it's illegal, and it's violates international law, and it's impractical. And the but is, and again, the last Hartman podcast was about this, 80% of Israelis are for this deal. So you have this tension, according to Danielle and Yossi's podcast, 80% of Israelis are for a deal that is anathema to the most of the rest of the world. And that feels like, and Danielle's critique is what's hateful to you, don't do to your, what's hateful to you, don't do to your neighbor, don't do to somebody else. It'd be hateful to us if this were to happen to us. How do we do that? So would love your thoughts on the Gaza proposal.
Well, first of all, I think there's a factual element here. I didn't hear Yossi, and I'm sure they addressed this nuance, which is very, very dramatic, which is Kahana spoke about forced transfer of Palestinians to someone else's land, and this is not what Trump is saying. I mean, if a few 100,000 Palestinians decide on their own to move somewhere to a place that will accept them, what's harmless ethically about that? What's harmless ethically about that? I have a different problem with this, but if it's not forced, so like people could move around. I mean, if they want to, and and there's why not? Like that, I think it's not that small nuance. If it's forced or not forced makes all the difference in the world. If it's kahana, if it's old kahana, or if it's just, people migrate around the world just based on incentives and it's how things are done. And if 300,000 Palestinians will want to migrate to Libya, should we stop that? Like what's the, why is it unethical? Why is that unethical? And I think that's what Trump is speaking about. He's speaking about it has to be everything in consent. And we're all adults here. Whoever wants it, it's consent. My problem with the Trump move is that it's different. It's a fantasy. It's a fantasy. And not that I have a problem with fantasies. I mean, I do have a problem with fantasies because there is a deep connection between utopian thinking and infantile way of thinking are very similar in the sense that what does a child want? He wants a problem to go away. Mommy, daddy, make it go away. And then when you mature, you realize problems are here to stay and you can't make them disappear. You have to actually deal with them and reorganize them and shrink them and do all the hard work that adults understand that are part of our life. Just make it go away. It's not going to go away. And then you become an adult and you ask the government, just make it go away. Usually we become infantile again when it comes to politics. And we see this across the board when people come to, that's utopian thinking. It's infantile thinking. And here I understand 80% of Israelis, they want the problem to go away. And and the daddy and Trump is saying, I'll just press the button, they will all go away. Why not? Why not? My problem is, I think being a centrist, I think means that you can't escape the fantasies. And here's like two hard facts. If I'm now in Nir Oz, okay, and I'm looking westward, and I see Gaza filled with 8 million Palestinians, and I know that they're the ones who came and slaughtered my kibbutz. And I know that they were cheering when that was done. So I know that they hate me. And I know that among many of them, they're cultivating the fantasy to do it again. And Hamas might try to develop the capabilities to do it again. And I still have to live here in Nir Oz. And when Gadi comes back, he says, I'm going to rebuild Nir Oz. And by the way, the army wasn't there to protect them on October 7th. Okay, so looking at defense in Gaza. And two people said, and I have two fantasies being sold to me. The left, not that there's much left in Israel, but in the world, says to me, if you make a two-state solution, they won't be hostile anymore. They'll accept you. They'll recognize your right to be here. That's a fantasy. Trump is saying, you know what? They won't be there anymore. So I'm assuming that these two facts are not going to change. I'm in Yeroz now, on the other side of the fence. There'll always be Palestinians and they'll always hate me. That sucks. The left says, the right says they won't be there. The left says the hate won't be there. I assume, I assume, I want just not to be, the problem's not going to go away, not the hate or the people. There's two forms of the problems disappearing. It's here to stay. Now what do we do? And that sucks. That's being mature, accepting the fact that the problem for the foreseeable future is here to stay. So my only problem with the Trump thing is not an ethical problem. It's the fact that he's helping us escape from the real conversation. So that was my...
Wow. Wow. Well, Micah, thank you for that. Wow. And I guess one last question before you launch into your prepared remarks, which is where does that leave us? And then talk about the dismantling. Where does that leave us?
Okay. Well, regarding the Palestinians, if the Palestinians and the Israelis are here to stay, and it doesn't seem like there's going to be a lot of, I just want to, Wes, I don't know what Daniel and Yossi said. A two-state solution is as realistic as Trump's transfer. Okay, these are two unrealistic ideas. There's two attempts to live in a fantasy, two attempts to deny the hard facts on the ground. I could go into both. There are two. Once I accept reality, Daddy, make it go away. It's not going away. It's here to stay. Now what do you do? And this is when the real conversation begins. Let's make time for that, for the real conversation, Wes. This isn't, it's not a question and answer. It's a bigger conversation about all the basic assumptions about this conflict. We have to examine all of them.
Okay, great. Well, Micah, thank you for being so responsive both to, the hostages, the stage 1 and stage 2 of the deal, and the Gaza proposal. Thank you. And now you are going to kind of zoom out and think with us about new thoughts you had about how the dismantling of the proxies says a lot about Israel and Israeliness.
If you look at this war, when this war broke out, we asked, okay, what is this moment? Is this a Kishinev moment? Because it was a pogrom and it felt like Kishinev. Is it a war of independence? Because it feels like we're fighting for our very existence. Is it the Yom Kippur War? Because it was so many, we're looking for the right analogy. That's what you do when something happens. You search for the analogy. Then when you feel about the analogy, you feel about that. We're not doing that anymore, right? It was October 7th. It's its own thing. In the future, by the way, I'm sure anything that will happen, people will say, oh, that's like October 7th. Like something will happen in somewhere in the world and say, that's their October 7th moment. It's now becoming, it's not similar to anything. Other things are similar to it. It's its own thing. But I'm just saying that, and I still want to, I think that's true. It's not similar to anything. And yet, in a very interesting way, this whole war has played out according to the pattern of the Yom Kippur War. And by the way, there's no metaphysics here. This is a coincidence, but it's an incredible coincidence. Yom Kippur War started with like a massive failure of the intelligence community, and we were taken by surprise. That surprise sent waves of chaos into the Israeli military establishment. Our Air Force didn't function in the first days of the Yom Kippur War. Our attempts to attack the Egyptians after 48 hours failed. There was like chaos. Moshe Dayan famously, in the third day of the war, holds his head and he says, we're losing our third Abayit HaShlishi. Like Zionism is going down. Like that was a sense in the beginning. Then somehow our army picked itself up started fighting back, started recovering, had a massive victory in the north. It took the Syrian army out of the Golan Heights. And then our army invaded Syria, and it stopped when it was pretty close to Damascus, when it was artillery distance from Damascus. An absolute victory in the north. In the south, it was an ambivalent victory, because on the one hand, we crossed the Suez Canal, and we were in Africa, and we managed to, we were very close to blocking the supply chain towards the Egyptian divisions that were in Sinai. So many Israelis says, yeah, that was our victory. But the Egyptians say, no, we won, because the war ended when you had Egyptian troops in Sinai, and Israel couldn't. So we had an absolute victory in the north and a very ambivalent victory in the south. 50 years and 1 day later, a war breaks out. The failure of the intelligence community was a larger failure. The surprise was a larger surprise. The chaos, the waves of chaos that were injected into the center of the Israeli military establishment were larger waves of chaos. The Air Force didn't function. The entire system collapsed. But then our soldiers recovered. And the recovery is as heroic, if not more, than the Yom Kippur War. And then at the end, the achievements in the North was so great, I'll speak about them later on. It was so great that they transformed the Middle East. As a result of our achievements in the North, Assad's regime collapsed. We have a new government in Lebanon. Interesting things are starting to happen in Iraq, where Iran's proxies are becoming weaker there. An absolute victory in the North, and a very ambivalent victory in the South. On the one hand, when Hamas says we won, you look at Gaza, that doesn't look like a victory. But when we say we won and we see those terrorists with their guns and their Toyota Jeeps, it's like, okay, that's not really a victory. So it's like we're replaying Yom Kippur War just on steroids. The victory is a bigger victory. The ambivalence is more ambivalent. The recovery is bigger recovery. The failure, like everything is like, it's like, so I'm not saying this is metaphysical. I'm just saying it's pretty amazing how like we played out the pattern of the Yom Kippur War. And after the Yom Kippur War, so Israel reinvented itself. See, Israel has, you know how in France, every time there's a major shift in the structure of society and the constitution, they say, okay, now we're a different France. And the way they say it, now we're not the Third Republic, we're the Fourth Republic. No, now we're the Fifth Republic. Like the French Republic means it's like a new age, a new stage in the biography of France. So I think it's fair to say that the first Israeli Republic was Ben-Gurion's Mapai, Labor Party, like socialist Israel, socialist secular Israel. And then after the Yom Kippur War, Israel started moving into the Second Israeli Republic. 77, we have elections, we have Likud, we have Begin, we have like a whole different Israel. I think, Rabbi, that after this Yom Kippur moment on steroids, what we're going to see is the reinvention of Israel's Third Republic. And that's what we have to fight for. How do we shape Israel's Third Republic? Third rebirth of Israel, the Third Republic of Israel. So my thoughts here are about, okay, so when we're trying to have a vision of the Israel's third, I hope, by the way, this metaphor, like in France, makes sense. So the Third Republic of Israel will be born out of everything that we've learned from October 7th war. And what we learned is, and this war has two moments: a massive failure at the beginning, an incredible success towards the end. And I think it's fair to say now, in Israel, we have to investigate and create what led us to the failure. And because we can't repeat that again, we have to create the knowledge. And now there's problems. Bibi doesn't want to form a committee and all that stuff. But I'm talking about not only what did we do wrong, there's a deeper question. Because I would say in everything that's weak and problematic and distorted in our collective personality led us to October 7th. The question that no formal committee is going to ask, but our public conversation in Israel and the Jewish world has to ask, is what in our collective personality is God, is weak, is broken, that led us to October 7th? That's one question. And there's the second question. In when Hezbollah's army went down from 100% to 20%, its leadership was destroyed. Iran realized, oh my God, we're not. Something very, very big happened here, where the proxies of what Iran calls the axis of resistance and what Israelis call the axis of evil, when that axis, that network of proxies, attacked Israel on started October 8th in 7 fronts, they had an idea in mind that Israel is weak, and if they attack us simultaneously, they could destroy Israel. What really happened, doing their attempt to destroy Israel, they destroyed themselves. How did that happen? And we have to ask the same questions, just like the questions, what did we do technically to bring down the axis of resistance? But also, I think it's fair to say that just like October 7th reflects the worst of Israeli collective character, the success represents the best of Israeli character. And we have to ask ourselves, what in our collective personality was exposed? What's the strength that was exposed that led us to the massive, incredible success that brought down Iran's axis of resistance? So I'll be focusing in the next few minutes on the second. I think we have to ask both questions. I'll be focusing on the second. We're so obsessed about what went wrong and what's wrong. And that's a very important conversation. I want to focus on the second question. In the history of war, there's a zero-sum game. Like when you ask who has a stronger country in the sense that it could use its military to achieve its goals and to destroy the military of its enemy, who has a stronger army when you measure armies? So I think the strength of armies is always a combination of two different things. One, its capabilities, and two, its will. Now, capabilities is the amount of your weapons and especially the quality of your weapons, the level of technology of your weapons. And will is the spirit of your soldiers. Are they willing to sacrifice? Are they willing to serve? Will they break down when things get tough? Those are two questions. Now, it seems like historically there's a zero-sum game between capability and will, because societies with high capability usually have low will. And many times societies with low capability have high will. Like think about France and Algeria in the 50s. We had higher capability, more weapons, high-tech weapons, advanced technology. France, who had the willingness to sacrifice and to fight. The Algerians. What happened in the end? Well, the French killed more than 1 million Algerians, and the Algerians kept fighting. The Algerians killed, I guess, around 20,000 French soldiers, and the French said, okay, we're going back to France. Take Algeria. It's yours. We surrender. The French-Algeria War was how will defeated capabilities. By the way, Vietnam, the same. Will defeated capabilities. By the way, Afghanistan, the same. The Mujahideen in Afghanistan, the Soviets had like the best weapons, but they didn't have the will to fight. The Mujahideens had the will to fight. So some people say will is stronger than capability. That is, by the way, the Muslim understanding of war. The founding moment in Islam was when, I want to take you to a founding moment in Muslim history. In the 7th century, if you're here in Israel, where I'm here in Israel, and you ask, let's say you're in year 600, okay? So you're asking, okay, who are the great powers of the world? So you have the Romans, which later historians will call Byzantion, the Byzantines, but they saw themselves as Romans because they were the Eastern Roman Empire. The Western Roman Empire collapsed. The Eastern, they were Romans, even though they didn't have Rome anymore. They were Romans. So if you're in Israel, you're governed by Romans, and to the west there's Romans, and to the east there's Persians. The Sasanian Emperor, the Persians. And then you ask, how long has the Romans and Persians been here? And the sense in the 600s and the year 600 is they were always here, right? It's not that they were always there, but it's always the Romans and the Persians. They're the great superpowers of the world. They've always been here. They'll always be here. Just like there's nature, just like there's land and sky and the moon and the stars and the sun. There's Romans in the West and Persians in the East. And what do these two superpowers do? Obviously, what do superpowers do? They fought each other. That's what they do. That's in their spare time. That's what they do. They were fighting each other and weakening each other. What they didn't know, that in the meantime, in the South, in what today we call Saudi Arabia, but back then it wasn't Saudi, it was just Arabia. You had all these Arab-speaking tribes that didn't have much in common besides a shared language, shared, by the way, poetry, but they have different gods and different power. I mean, they couldn't unite because they were trapped in vicious cycles of vengeance. You know how the vengeance works. You killed my sister, I'll kill your mother. You killed my mother, I'll kill your uncle. You're like, and you can't stop it. It's ongoing cycles of vengeance between these Arab tribes, and they couldn't unite. And then a very charismatic spiritual leader appears, Muhammad, and he managed to do the impossible, to unite the Arab tribes, to be one nation. And the glue that put them together is Islam. It's one nation under God. And then when Muhammad dies, his khalifim, the people that replaced him, took all this energy created by unity and God and religion. And unity plus God creates what in Islam is called asabiya. Asabiya is strong will to fight. And then they create not one, but two armies. Two armies, these Arabs, two armies. And one army is sent to attack the Persian Empire. And the second army, simultaneously, the Roman Empire, which is chutzpah. Is more like these Arabs from the south that no one knew existed, want to bring down not one, but two empires that in the experience of the people were always there. It's more than chutzpah. It's impossible. And the only thing that's more amazing of their attempt to do that is the fact that they succeeded to do that. They swallowed most of the Roman Empire, a large part of it, and they swallowed the entire Persian Empire, which is the me'atimul rabi. It's will defeating capability. And in Muslim memory, that's why, by the way, Hassan Nasrallah, how do you say, Rabbi, the opposite of Zichrono Livracha? So the opposite of that.
Yitzmach Shemo, may his name be erased. There you go.
Yeah, but yeah. So when he, which was part of the builders of the narrative of the axis of resistance, his narrative was like in a speech he gave in Binjbed in the south of Lebanon in May 2000, after Israel left Lebanon under Barak. He said the following line: Israel has nuclear bombs and the best air force in the world, but it's weaker than cobwebs. What is he saying? He's saying the real measurement of strength of a society is not its capability, its will. And Western countries are high in capability and low in will. And Israel is Western because it's materialistic and individualistic, and it's doomed to collapse. It's doomed to go down. Now, by the way, now is Nasrallah right? Is will always stronger than capability? I'm not sure. Not all history is Afghanistan, Vietnam, and Algeria. The past 500 years is the rise of Western civilization. And the past 100 years is the rise of the United States of America within Western civilization. And the reason why Western civilization is so powerful is because it has high capabilities and the best technology and industrialized before everyone else. So macro picture is the victory of capability, but micro picture, the stories of Islam is the strength of will. I just want to see. History has now answered what's more. It has many answers to the question: what's more important, capability or will? I just want to notice it usually doesn't come together, and there is a reason why it doesn't come together. It's because what creates high capability is abundance. Wealthy societies have great armies because they could buy and develop the most advanced weapons. The problem is that abundance that creates high capabilities is exactly what dilutes will. That's a matter of fact. And I think the reason for that is that what creates high capability is individualism. What creates wealth is individualism, when there's free competition between individuals that brings out ambition from those individuals and creativity from those individuals. And that creates two things: new ideas and profits. And together that creates the strength of a society and the best army. But the problem is that individualism that creates the best armies also weakens the will to fight. Because if you're individualistic societies, like, why should I, fight for the collective? We're all on our own, aren't we? So the same individualism that creates high capabilities creates low will. Collectivism that creates high will creates low capabilities. It's a zero-sum game. It's a zero-sum game. Israel destroyed Iran's proxies because it managed to break the zero-sum game. What did we see in this war? We saw, on the one hand, we looked at the north, we saw 4,000 pagers exploding simultaneously. Boom. And then we saw all their walkie-talkies explode. And then there was Mifsach Tzeitzafon, which our Air Force, with high technology and the best intelligence, managed to take their arsenal of Hezbollah and shrink it to 20%. And then with the best intelligence, he managed to knock down Akil and all the leadership of Radwan, their elite forces. And then, to top that all out, we knocked down Hassan Nasrallah in a moment of high technology and best intelligence. And what we saw in those 11 days of September were mind-blowing capabilities of the Israeli army. The Spectator writes the next day that Israel is has the most effective army in the world. But that's after more than a year where we saw our soldiers fighting. Throughout this war, every time a wounded soldier in a hospital in Israel, which in some way is interested in me because he listened to my podcast or read a book or whatever, and asked for me to come, I just left what I did and I went there. By the way, not because I'm so holy, it's because this is what every Israeli did. This is right. So I went there to sit there, and I sat. So I had the privilege to sit with few Israeli soldiers, wounded soldiers. And the rabbi, there was every soldier I met, and this is very typical. They all said to me that they want to go back to the war zone and fight. They want to go back to their friends, to their pluga, back to Gaza, back to Khan Yunis, back to where they are. The job is not over. Our soldiers are not, our hostages are not back yet. Hamas is still standing. I have to go back and fight. And I remember all the stories about soldiers in Vietnam that they have like a scratch in their arm, like, okay, this is my ticket out of here. Our soldiers, I think there was at least 1,500 of them that actually did that. Wounded soldiers that went back to fight. And that is just a representation of a larger spirit we saw in Israel. Where war breaks out, when war breaks out, like in Russia, people fled Russia. In Israel, people fled vacation and went back to Israel. 300,000 Israelis go back to Israel. Tomer Greenberg, alav shalom, the mefaked, the commander of Gdud 13, of the battalion 13 in Golani. He had, I hope I'm not getting the numbers wrong because these are all Anashim Kedoshim, but I think he lost 44 soldiers on October 7th. October 7th itself, 44 soldiers, which means his battalion is only a few hundred people. He lost 44 on October 7th, and he had to pick them up and to go fight. And they go fight from the north of Gaza and make their way all the way to Saja'iyeh. And then in Saja'iyeh, Tomer Greenberg hears that his connection on the radio with one of the soldiers, which was one of the houses there in Gaza, was disconnected. So obviously the fear is that he's kidnapped. So Tomer and all the commanders run into that building to save the soldiers. They saved their soldiers, but he got killed doing it. And this is a typical story. What I'm trying to say is that in the past war, Israel has shown high levels of asabiya, the willingness to fight, the willingness to sacrifice for the collective. The French had capability, the Algerians had will. Capability is your ability to inject, to make your enemy suffer. Will is your ability to suffer to carry it, to bear it, and to continue fighting. What Israel showed in this war is it has both. High levels of will. We got hit, we continued fighting, we got hit, we continued fighting, and highest levels of capability. How did we do that? Israel managed to, now that has nothing to do with what we did, it has everything to do with who we are. Critical, and many of people here heard me speak about this. The superpower of Israelis is they're hybrid, which means they're simultaneously very individualistic and very collectivist at the same time. At the same time. We have the spirit of individualism that leads to, the startup nation. But then that person that's building a startup, living in Tel Aviv, he has his own dream. And he's trying to make that dream a reality with his own talent, his own gifts, his own ambition. It's all that energy, all that individualistic energy. Then October 7th happened. He's 140 days in Miluim, in Khan Yunis. What's that? And then Miluim is over. He's back in his startup. What's that? Individualism is an emotional system. It's not an idea. It's an emotional system. It's the passion for self-fulfillment. Collectivism is a whole different emotional system. It's about self-sacrifice. Many Israelis have both systems in them. And it's not a coincidence that so many Israelis have both systems in them. It's because Israel itself is hybrid. We're a Jewish democracy. And the fact that we're Jewish, it cultivates our collective belonging to Jewish tradition, to the Jewish people, to the Jewish story. In democracy, we have our individual rights and our individual freedoms and and it's the project of Israel. I mean, the fact that you have not all Israelis. You have some Israelis that are hyper individualists and they don't care about the collective. They're a minority, and some are collectivists with no human rights, with no individualism. But most Israelis are hybrid. Most Israelis are hybrid. Collectivism is what brings will. Individualism is what brings capabilities. Israel broke the zero-sum game between will and capability because we're both individualists and collectivists. We managed to do something that we managed to, I would say, crack a historic enigma because of our hybrid nature. So the answer to the question, how did we there's October 7th is one story and expose everything that's weak in our collective personality. That's one conversation. This talk is about the second conversation that we're not having enough. The tremendous victories in the North expose something very deep, very healthy in our collective personality. The fact that we're liberal and national simultaneously. The fact that we're hybrid. Now when we envision the Third Republic of Israel, we ask two things. How do we not be the person that brought us to October 7th? But how do we amplify the strength that brought us to victories in the North? That saved Israel from real existential risk. How do we do that? We have to figure out, this is not about self-transformation, building the Third Republic of Israel. It's about self-discovery. We have to discover our strength and then use that strength to build the hybrid, to build what Israel could be. One last remark. The 20th century is the story of the failure of collectivist societies. Fascism, Nazism, Mao, communism, all the different versions of collectivism failed. They failed because they turned against human nature. Individuals have a need for self-fulfillment. They have a need, you can't wipe the internal world of the intellect of the individual and tell him or her to be a part of the collective and to forget themselves and for that to work. Collectivism failed in the 20th century. Then 1989, after the failure of the two versions of collectivism, fascism and communism, so Francis Fukuyama famously wrote that there were three ideas: fascism, communism, liberalism. Fascism was failed in the World War II, communism in the Cold War, and liberalism is the last idea standing, and it's here to prevail. Meaning different brands of collectivism lost, individualism won. And that's the end of history. But it turns out the history continued. And I think what we're seeing now, and this is, I know we're running out of time, but this is a part of a larger, I think what we're seeing now in the West, and specifically in the United States of America, is we're seeing the failure of individualism. Alexis de Tocqueville in the 19th century came to the United States of America. He noticed individualism. He saw the strength of individualism, but also the danger. That individualism will turn into egoism. That people that feel they're special, unique, and different to everyone else eventually won't care about anyone else. That will lead to apathy. And what it's really leading to is loneliness and the many levels of loneliness. And loneliness creates a yearning for belonging. And then that creates the rise of the most extreme versions of collectivism. What we're seeing now in the West, and specifically the United States of America, I think is the failure of individualism. So collectivism failed in the 20th century. Maybe individualism is failing in the 21st century. In that sense, I think we have to re-understand what it means that the state of Israel is a light into the nations. Because in the 1950s, we thought that we were a role model society because of our brand of socialism. People from all over the world came to visit the kibbutz because it was the best version of socialism. In Russia, you had socialism imposed from the top using power. In Israel, we had socialism growing from the bottom using, it's not like there was in Kahana and Trump, but it's not forced. It was spontaneous. It was voluntary. It was the best form of socialism. And from all over the world, there were volunteers. I remember when I was a kid, there was always volunteers from Europe in the kibbutzim. They wanted to breathe in the air of the most healthy version of socialism. That's not happening anymore. Israel's not a model for socialism anymore. And socialism itself is not an attractive idea like it used to be back then. But then in the 90s, we had a new brand of tourism coming to Israel, coming to visit the startup nation, coming to visit our startups, our companies, trying to say, wow, Israel is the most innovative country in the world. Per capita, there's more startups than any other country in the world. And people from all over the world want to understand the secret sauce of Israeli capitalism, Israeli individualism, Israeli creativity. I think the third is those are the role model societies of the first Israeli Republic, the kibbutz, and the second Israeli Republic, the startup company. The third Israeli Republic is a different role, it's a different idea of a Or LaGoyim, of a light into the nations. It's after the failure of collectivism and maybe the failure of individualism, Israeli holistic model of being a Jewish democracy, of being collectivist and individualist, might be something to show the world. Meaning it's that power of our hybrid nature is also what saved Israel from a hostile world. And it also might be the light that Israel could show a world that needs new ideas of how to organize their societies. So this is how I think there's a lot to learn from this war. And this war is going to generate the ideas and the knowledge that will help us build the Israeli Third Republic. The failures teach us one thing, and the success teaches you something else. What I wanted to do here, Wes, here with the community of close friends, is to share the first thoughts of what do we learn from the success, about what's strong about us, and what can take us to rebuild Israel, and it's the Third Republic of Israel.
Wow. So, Micha, let me just respond first by saying thank you. Thank you. No words to express how grateful and also how wise you are. Just to put this in a Jewish context, yesterday was Parsha Yitro, and it was Ma'amad Har Sinai. I honestly think your words are a revelation. And I honestly think this Zoom was a modern form of Sinai. Everybody on the Zoom in America, it's President's Day weekend. Everybody here loves Israel and has so much love and curiosity about Israel. And your words were a Zoom form of Ma'amad Har Sinai and have given us, Vayhi kol shafar halech v'chazek ma'od. The sound of the shofar kept getting louder and louder. And I think the sounds of your words and the thoughts that you shared, every thought you shared about the deal, about the proposal, everything you said about what it reflects about Israeli society, that we dismantled Iran's proxies, is just going to grow louder and louder as we marinate on it. So thank you for revelation on the weekend of revelation. We're going to just take a single question. Amy, ask your best question from the chat group.
Unfortunately, I only have one question in the chat group because people sent them to they sent them to the chat. I have one in the Q&A. So Micah, I just have to say two things. One is thank you. Thank you. And two is you always give us hope for the future of Israel without fail. So we can't do that ourselves. So thank you. The second is unrelated to the second part of your presentation, but it came in the first part when somebody asked, why can't the Gazans, the Palestinians, move to the West Bank and give up the land in Gaza? And then you get a Palestine of the future and you don't have two land masses to deal with. I leave that to you. I
don't want them in the West Bank.
Makes things worse, right? Makes things worse where they're already bad.
Yeah, what I'm afraid of, it makes things much worse. Yes, it's a transfer of the problem and it amplifies it. My fear is that this idea it's not going to happen, so it doesn't matter. But if, let's say, 400,000 Palestinians leave their homes and move to Italy, okay, let's say Italy says we want all, they're not going to say that, but let's just say in an imaginary world it happens. Who are the 400,000 that will move? Well, probably the more educated Palestinians, which are more like upper middle class. And when they leave Gaza, it will just destabilize Gaza more. So what we do is probably two things will happen. One, now we'll have a problem in Italy because we'll have all these people being anti-Israel and building networks against Israel in Italy. And the problem in Gaza will only grow because you don't have their upper middle class. And so I'm afraid of the unintended consequences of this move. Just like I think the unintended consequences of the two-state solution might be disastrous, the unintended consequences, the transfer idea might also be disastrous. The good news is both of them are not going to happen in the foreseeable future. But by the way, you just put one more thing into the mix regarding this Trump thing. This idea will never happen, but the fact the idea exists might be good for Israel because now it's something we could trade with. So, we won't do the transfer. We'll do something else. So I could see different dividends that we have just by the existing. Just the idea exists. Implementing it will be bad news, but just having it exist, if our leaders are smart, they're not always smart, and they know how to use this to maneuver politically, it could get us closer to normalization. It could do a lot of things. Just by the fact that the idea is out there. So I don't think the fact the idea is out there is a bad thing. I think making it a reality it's not going to happen anyway, but the attempt might not be great results.
Okay, so Micah, thank you. I want to wrap up with a few points. Obviously, we have so much to think about with Israel and so many questions about the morning after, etc. And if both fantasies aren't real, what will be? 3 points to help the conversation. One is it is today, February 16th. CLP, the Hartman program starts June 25th. It's already at a record number. And so more North Americans are flocking to Jerusalem to have that ongoing conversation about what's next and what's the morning after and what will be for Israel and the Palestinians and the region, etc. Highest number they've ever had. So we have a very nice crowd ourselves. But if you are on the fence and if you are thinking about continuing the conversation in Jerusalem, and if you would like to have more time with Micah in Jerusalem, the time to get off the fence is now, because soon we will run out of numbers. So if you're open to the idea, we'd love to have you, but reach out to Amy Klein. You might have met her before. Let Amy know that you're interested because now is the time. 2 last things is February 25th, we have Elena Stein Hain. She's coming at the shul in person. She's been in Israel for the year. February 25th, she'll be there to talk about Israel, how it is so powerful and how it is so vulnerable at the same time. And then on March 10th, Tal Becker will be in dialogue in person at Temple Emanuel. So our conversation is going to continue, and Micah, our gratitude to you and our love for you are both endless. Thank you so much for your Torah, Parshat Yitro. Lots of love, guys. Thank you all for joining us.